presentation, Sunny, but now we're going to move over to Michael Leong.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, I do.
Everyone's good? All right. Give me a minute. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. It is, I guess, now afternoon, everyone's time zone. It is great to be here. And I'm right now going to be presenting about is a new hierarchical structure needed for how we think about rail planning in our cities. A little bit about myself before I get started. I thought I'd introduce myself by the transit systems that I've once relied on in my life. Top left, I've been actually spent 10 years in Singapore, relying on their MRT, LRT, and bus network. Before that, I used to live in New Jersey near New York, so that's where NJ Transit and the New York subway comes in. Of course, I really enjoyed Sunny's presentation just now. And then the BART is because I'm right now in Berkeley. I'm actually studying in Berkeley in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm also doing some research on transportation behavioral modeling, and also made some forays into air transportation. But no, this isn't really an academic conference. This conference actually is what it made me really think about why exactly I got into transportation at first. And I got into transportation really because I wanted to solve these three issues. I wanted our systems to be more integrated. I wanted more people to come out and say, it just works. That was like so easy to use. That was so intuitive to use. I want people to think our systems are more thoughtful. I want people to think that, the designers thought of me, the user. They didn't just do what was said in the civil design codes or what was the easiest or lowest cost option to build. And I want it to be efficient. I want people to see there's no better way to travel because everything is really synchronized and everything really works very well. And this is not it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's not an exhaustive list. There's so many other things. There's safety, there's sustainability, and whatever not. But these are the areas that I feel are not exactly talked about nearly enough in academia or in planning. I want to start by doing something that's very, very familiar to all of us, which is at some point in our lives, we've seen this kind of hierarchy in road planning. We have highways, we have arterials, we have collectors and locals. And each of these, you know exactly just by looking at pictures of them what they do. You want to travel a long distance, you take a highway. You want to travel a medium distance, you take an arterial. You want to travel a short distance, you take a local road. There's that mobility and accessibility distinct hierarchical trade-off. The issue is that we look at a train system, and this is the system that I relied on in Singapore for many, many years. And in many measures, it is a good system. It's very clean. It's usually on time. But what happens is that if I stay at the brown circle, if I want to take a short trip, I take the train. If I want to take a medium trip to the city, I take the train. If I want to take a long trip across the island, I still take the same train. And what happens with these kind of systems is that, and this will be very, very different if it's a road, if I was driving, because I would take a highway, definitely take a highway for that long trip, take a local or collector roads for that short trip, and an arterial or maybe even a highway for that medium trip. The result is that, we've developed a road system, a hierarchical road system that lets us, within the boundaries of a single metro area, cover an exponentially increasing distance with our time. But on public transit, if we have one-size-fits-all systems, that's a linear distribution, and it becomes much, much more pronounced as distance increases, which is always a problem for people who live really, really far out from the city. So the big question is that why is this disparity not reflected in the way we think about intra-urban public transit? And I feel that's because when we look at how we categorize public transit, we categorize rails by their maximum speed, very much like how we categorize roads. But this is used mainly for inner-city rail. We don't really have a good system for intra-city rail. Because if we classify things by the maximum speed, I'm just going to zoom in on speed, we realize that's such a bad classification because a lot of systems have maximum speeds of 50, 60, 70 miles per hour. But with all the stopping that they do in the middle, you actually have an average speed of 20 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour instead. And this is really, really different because if you're traveling on a highway with a speed limit of 65 miles per hour, if you're not traffic, you actually can travel at a sustained speed of 65 miles per hour for a long time. When you can't do that on a subway or a train, it's going to stop and stop and stop and stop and stop and stop. So And it's also really deceiving because if we look at things like the Paris RER and the Paris Metro, you would think that the RER, which is a faster regional system, is only 1.5 times that of the Metro, but actually it's almost double in its average speed. And then we have other even more differences, like the San Francisco Muni is more than 4 times as slow on average speed as the San Francisco BART. So Paris is one of those cities that we started seeing this hierarchical structure emerge. And we saw this emerge because now we have a metro that's for short distances, and actually the train stations in Paris are actually really close together, so it gets really annoying sometimes. But we have the RER, Réseau Express Régional, which is kind of like an express within the city. There's really, really few stops. The red line, kind of expresses the one. And we see this emerging in London too. For the longest time, they built stop system, a one-size-fits-all, and then now they suddenly realize they're building a crossrail to get across the city much faster. It's going to be a game changer, and hopefully it's going to open very, very soon. And then in Seoul, another system where they just densified single one-size-fits-all lines forever for the longest time. And now they're actually building this thing called the Great Train Express, which is a kind of an express of these lines. So I have developed so far this phased transition of systems, where we realize that at the early stages, systems always like to focus on accessibility-oriented services. They want to serve as many people as possible, and that's not misguided. That is a good planning practice. But what we realize is that as systems expand, they realize too late that this one-size-fits-all method is very, very inefficient. And at the same time, that's usually when the public transit mode share is approaching, maybe 30, 40, 50%. And we're trying to figure out how do we actually capture that other rest of the market that is currently used to driving, because they're very, very time sensitive. And that is why they start building mobility-oriented services to complement the system. And every single city has a different time scale. Now, the question I always have is that why I think cities are all recognizing this too late. And why they're all recognizing this too late is because of the technicalities of designing construction of stations. If you built one line in this model, in this theoretical city, and you have a station box over here, you start realizing that you want to build new lines. You have to build station boxes that are slightly off, and you have to build connector walkways between the stations. And this doesn't look really, really bad on a map, but it looks like this in real life. A lot of people really, really hate walking through these winding tunnels at stations because we realized that, we needed another station and we had to build it further out because of the construction site constraints. And we have to think, why do we only have this problem in trains? Why didn't we have this problem in roads? We didn't have this problem in roads because the equivalent of this tunnel on a road is this. The equivalent of a tunnel is this. It doesn't look very, very nice, but it's not that hard to drive on compared to walking down that walkway. And what happens is that we go back to this graph. If we fail to realize this, we're actually handicapping ourselves because we have a time constant for inconvenient interchanges that prolongs and makes it harder to achieve our aspirational curve that mimics that hierarchical road system that we right now have within a metro area. What we can instead do is, if we have the foresight to actually plan hierarchical interchanges where, it doesn't make sense at one point, but at some point in the city's future, you will have more train lines converging at that same station. That is where good planning practices can save and save us from that time constant that we saw in that graph. The New York system is actually one of the only systems that ignored this whole time sequence, because from the very start, they tried to build this hierarchical interchange express and local system. So, you're going a long way, you use the express. If you're going a short way, you use the local. And they designed all their platforms such that you really can just cross-platform transfer between the express and the local. And why don't we build these kind of systems anymore? I don't know. Maybe because these were all built by private companies that were all competing, so they understood the time value of the customers at that time. Maybe. So the question really is, how do we move forward? How can we improve hierarchical planning in the current context of the US? And I have 3 ways that we can do that. One is to very, very strictly look at purpose-based planning. In a lot of cities that are developing, you'll realize that they have the red line as the initial metro line, and then they start wanting to build a green metro line to serve areas very similar to the red metro line. And you start realizing, actually, this is one of the stupidest things you can do. Because if you look at how, would you ever build two parallel arterial roads together to a city? You wouldn't ever do that. You would build something more like this. You would build a highway, you would build the arterial road, and then you would build a whole bunch of collector roads to get to the places. How that would be in a rail system is you would build a really, really good way to get people to the stations and then build a really, really high-speed express linking these stations. And how we have to do this is we have to make sure that we have a very, very strict component of a target average speed. So we have to say, if we're building a system that's supposed to be an express, we need to be able to target these speeds. We can't be stopping at every single city along the line and satisfying and bowing to all these political constraints. That's going to lengthen everyone else's journey time. And then we will actually have a hierarchy that's very, very similar to how we plan for roads. And it doesn't need to be expensive. I want to emphasize it doesn't need to be expensive. This is actually something I proposed in Singapore a long time ago, where we had a disused platform at a train station where there was supposed to be a line coming through here, and then it got rerouted somewhere else. And I said, hey, well, why don't we actually build? It happened that this train station is right next to the end of a highway that has a bus lane on it. And we were like, okay, well, why don't we actually build a ramp down and let people cross-platform transfer between a train and a bus in the system? And then the bus could even be used as your express if it's traveling on a bus lane on a highway. The second way we can look at it is network-based planning. And this is something that, network engineers have been trying to solve for a very long time. Building a parallel line increases the resilience and communicability of a network, but it does nothing to increase the degree centrality of the city and hubs. I mean, when we want to increase the degree centrality, that is where the express really pays off. And this is also where we get to the inefficient transfer problem again, because if we have an inefficient transfer, you're adding a link. These are all supposed to be in minutes, by the way. You're adding a link between the two systems compared to actually just allowing you to transfer from one system to another. And the third one is synchronized planning and user-centric design. And this is something where, every single time I'm always amazed by when the BART in San Francisco pulls into the MacArthur or 19th Street stations, they actually wait for each other to do a time transfer. And whenever they arrive together, it's always really, really satisfying to watch, because then branch C can transfer to branch A and branch D can transfer to branch B on a guaranteed transfer. And what if we did this to complement the hierarchy? We had a feeder which had a time transfer to the local, and then a local which had a time transfer to the express. Then if we think this way, and usually we don't think this way because these are all operated by different agencies, but if we think this way, then we can actually have a seamless journey without worrying about transfers all the way. So I want to leave everyone off by a quote that yes, it's my own quote. I know it's a little bit funny, but when back a few years ago, Singapore actually introduced this program that said we want to be a car light city. And I said, well, a true car light city is one where car light options are the fastest, cheapest, safest, most comfortable, and most reliable form of transportation available. You don't need to be coerced not driving your car. It just doesn't make sense. But at the same time, a true car light transition is not one where we regulate to make things equally hard, but we innovate to make things equally easy. So with that, I want to thank everyone for your time today, and I have my email over there, and of course I'll stay on the chat for a while.